Hello, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Laura, and today we're going to talk about all the books I read in January. I'll tell you about the books that I read in order of least to most favorite of the books that I read in January. Starting with one that I don't have a copy of anymore. I already had to return it back to the library, which was Till Death Do Us Part by Laurie Elizabeth Flynn. This was a thriller that came out last year, and we read it for Jessie from Reading with Jess's Sleep When I'm Dead book club discussion. I don't know if anybody in that book club discussion gave it a 5 stars, unfortunately. I know at least one person gave it a 4. For me, it was a 2. This is a thriller following 2 different people along 2 different timelines, and their lives do intersect in that it's the husband and son of both of those 2 characters who has died. There's something that doesn't sit right with his now widowed wife, so she's kind of reaching out and going out on her own to try to figure out what happened to him. And then we also get the backstory from the mother's perspective. For me, the shocking elements of this were just like very convenient, very kind of out of the blue, and just didn't make sense. You could tell that they were really just put in there just for like the shock value and not really to help piece the story together. The characters were messy. I really didn't like following along with either one of the characters. It's also very slow in the beginning. It does pick up about like the 3rd part. It's broken up into I think 4 or 5 different parts of the book, and the 3rd part for me was my favorite. It picked up the pace and got a little bit more interesting, but then I hated the ending. Hated it. So unfortunately, it ended up being a 2-star. Definitely not a thriller that I would necessarily recommend. I did like the atmosphere and like the setting. It's based in wine country, and California is where most of it takes place. And there's a lot of wine tasting, and she describes wine and the winemaking process and the wineries and the taste of certain wines really, really well. Like, that was done very vividly. I felt like I was there, and I do enjoy wine and going to wineries. I actually took this with me with my husband to a winery and read part of it there. So that made the experience just a little bit more fun reading this. Unfortunately, though, it's not really a thriller that I'm gonna ever think about or probably even recommend to anyone. Next we have Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This is a classic that I read for Gwen at Gwendolyn Kinsinger's Patreon book club, The Night Owls. I got to participate in the discussion for this, so we actually like got pretty deep into what may not even be that deep of a novel, but I did mostly enjoy Peter Pan. I gave it 3 stars. It's not exactly the same story as like the Disney animated version. It's definitely not the same story as Hook either, but it brings in elements of both of those 2 movies. So for me, I think I overall like enjoyed just the nostalgia of having grown up watching those 2 movies quite a bit. The other thing I did really like about this was Mrs. Darling's character and just what I felt like this book had to say about motherhood and the importance of a mother's role in bringing up her children. And I liked, of course, the play on imagination and childhood and never wanting to grow up. We talked in the book club discussion that it also has some things to say about like the concept of kids who are children, but they have to do kind of like grown-up things and essentially are forced to kind of grow up even though they may not be ready for it or want to, in the way that like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys have to fight the pirates. There's a lot more violence in this than the movie adaptations that I remembered growing up. Tinkerbell is a little stinker, which I do remember her being that way, especially towards Wendy in the movie. So I really like Tinkerbell still in this, but some people in that book club discussion were like surprised by how mean Tinkerbell kind of is in this version of the book. Well, in the original version. Anyway, overall, I liked it. Didn't like love it. It's not a favorite classic, but I'm happy to have read it and discussed it with Gwen and the other Patreons in her book club. Next in the list is another 3-star, and this might surprise some of you, but that is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. I know that so many people really like this one. I think for a lot of people this is a 5-star thriller. I just found it a little bit too gimmicky, a little too unbelievable. And I especially didn't like that everybody in this small town seemed to be like cheating or has been cheated on or was abused or is an abuser. It's like, is anybody in this small town that this book takes place in unproblematic? It seemed like it was pretty much everybody. Therefore, I didn't really have any characters that I would root for. This book also relies on the fact of like the main character not remembering what happened when her friend was murdered, and therefore she's suspect, and Ben, the podcaster, is trying to help her remember and solve this murder case. I just feel like that is so convenient. I know that amnesia does happen, but it just feels really overdone in thrillers and very convenient. So I didn't love that. I liked the podcast element of it though. I liked the relationship between the main character and the podcaster and how they were kind of working together. So there were things that I liked about it. Again, I think the audiobook was pretty good. I would highly recommend listening to the audiobook version if you do read this. I kind of read them like in tandem. I think the audiobook really helped me get into like the podcast parts of the book. But overall, I just think it's not going to be one that I really think about or highly recommend to anybody. It was a fine time, but not one that for me is going to be super memorable. The good news is the last 4 books that I read for this month are all 4 or 5 stars. So I would say that most of these I would recommend. I think my least favorite out of the 4 and 5 stars I read this month was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I really liked this one as just like that classic murder mystery, whodunit. This follows a bunch of characters that we get introduced to at the beginning who are or were invited to come to this mansion on an island. It's very isolated type of setting. And then one by one, the characters are getting murdered. So there's a lot of suspicion about everybody around them and people trying to work together to figure out who it is. I read this at the same time that we were watching the show The Traitors, which is like a reality TV show with a murder mystery like plot twist, and people are like getting murdered and voting people out and banishing, and it's like you can just tell like how much influence Agatha Christie murder mysteries have had even today on our, pop culture, books, television, movies, and things like that. So I was happy to have read it for this, and it was a page turner. Like, it was a slow start when we were getting introduced to the characters just in the first chapter or two, but as soon as they got to the mansion, it was like one thing was happening left and right, and I just wanted to binge the whole entire thing. I read it super quickly. I didn't love the ending, so that's the main reason this didn't end up being a 5-star for me. It was because the ending just felt very like, let me tell you exactly what happened and the things that you like missed along the way. And so I just felt like it wrapped up just a little too perfectly at the ending for me. But again, overall, it was a really fun time reading it. So 4 stars and would recommend. The other 4-star that I had this month was First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. Now this thriller I really did like. This is another really popular mystery thriller from last year. It's also a Reese's Book Club pick, which it seems like I do pretty much tend to enjoy her book club picks, the ones that I've read, and this was no exception. So this follows the main character who is kind of living a double life. She's got a new boyfriend and their relationship is moving very, very quickly, and you know that there's something going on right from the start. And I also had a lot of suspicions about the boyfriend. I thought he probably had some secrets of his own, so it was really fun watching the way that this unraveled. I really liked following that unreliable like type of main character where you didn't really know if she was the good guy, the bad guy, or what was going on. It goes along 2 different timelines as well. So you have the present day timeline, and then you have some of her backstories and her past aliases, because she's lived under several different identities, and you come to kind of understand as the book goes on how those are all pieced together. And I liked the ending. I was surprised by a couple things of the ending. I did predict like one of the pieces or a couple pieces of the way that it was wrapped up, but overall I liked the twists. I liked the flow of the book. For me, it wasn't a 5-star because when we were going back and forth to some of the different aliases in her past, I felt like it was kind of a lot. And it did seem like a little far-fetched, you know, with some of the things that she was doing and involved with and getting away with, but I was rooting for her nonetheless. Like, so as far-fetched as some of it sometimes felt, I still felt like it was enjoyable and I had a fun time reading it. So I would recommend this one if you like thrillers. The last two are both 5 stars for me, and I will say the one that's my new all-time favorite. This was a really good one too, though. This is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. I was surprised by how much I liked this book. The main character comes from a more rough, more like poverty type of upbringing, and her best friend comes from a more rich, wealthy, well-to-do family, and she marries into that type of family, and the main character gets an invite from that friend to say, hey, I've got these 2 stepchildren that I need somebody to help me watch and be a nanny for them. And they have something special about them in that they burst into flames whenever they get upset. And as crazy as that sounds, there is so much like heart, humor, wit, snarkiness, sarcasm. I just really loved this main character. Like, as sarcastic as she is, as unfit as she seems to care for these 2 children, I just really fell in love with her relationship and how sweet she was, because while she's definitely not like a perfect caregiver, she has a lot of heart and a lot of determination to do what's right for the children, and it was just a really, really fun time. There's a lot of really good, like, witty, snarky lines in this from the main character, and I really enjoyed it. So this was a surprise for me. If you like that type of like magical realism, literary fiction type of book, I think you would really enjoy this one. And last but not least, a favorite of all time. I've been reading this book since November. I took a break in December so that I could read some Christmassy books, and then I picked it back up and finished it in January. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This was the best Stephen King book that I have ever read. I have had mixed thoughts on some of his books, and I don't know if this might be my first 5-star Stephen King book as well. I'd have to go back and check, but I know most of his books that I read have either been like a 3 to 4 or 4.5 stars, but this was amazing. I mean, it's a big book. It's over 800 pages. This is just such a detailed, meandering journey of a story about a man who goes back in time to try to prevent the assassination of JFK. But it's not just about that. So it is like a lot of historical fiction, a lot of following Lee Harvey Oswald, and actually like very minimal like following Kennedy himself. It's more about following Oswald's side of the story and the things that he was doing leading up to the president's assassination. But it's also about Jake, the main character, and his interactions with the people that he meets when he goes back in time. Certain characters that he saves, certain characters that he couldn't save and wishes that he did. This book took so many detours, but there are none that I would cut out to make the story shorter. They all came together in a way that made sense and in a way that made you appreciate who Jake is as a main character and want to root for him. He's not a perfect type of guy. He definitely has some flaws. It's just that quintessential, like, your average Joe getting a chance to do something really big and really important, but then also maybe seeing that sometimes the small things that we do, the smaller choices that we make, have just as big, if not bigger, impact than some of the big ones. So I cried at the end of this. I don't want to talk about it because I'll cry again, but it was just such a good story. This one will be with me for a very long time. I can see myself wanting to reread this. I borrowed it from my mom. She may or may not get it back. If she wants to read it again, because she's heard me gushing about it now, she might want to reread it. She's read it before too, but it's been a while for her. I think she read it when it first came out, as she does with most Stephen King books. She's a huge Stephen King fan, and this book makes it really easy to see why. I guarantee you're going to hear me talk about this in my top 10 favorites of 2025. But that is it for all the books that I read in the month of January. Again, overall, I was pretty happy with the way the reading month went. I didn't have any DNFs or 1 stars, so that's always a good thing. But that's going to be the end of this video. I've got some fun things planned for the month of February, reading some new releases, reading some romances in February. So stay tuned, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more from me, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.